All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a profoundly sensitive yet totally universal family dynamic. We're looking at fairness and justice among children, and specifically how the Islamic tradition tackles this incredibly complex, age-old parenting challenge.
I mean, let's be honest. Is it actually possible to love all your children equally? It's kind of the ultimate parenting taboo, right? Nobody wants to admit to playing favorites. But what's fascinating here is how Islamic teachings anticipated this deeply human flaw and explicitly legislated against it to protect the family.
Here is what we'll be covering today. First, children as a divine trust. Second, material equality. Third, fairness in affection. And finally, preventing jealousy. Starting with Section 1, a divine trust, which is the absolute foundation of parenting in Islam. To really understand the rules, we have to grasp the theological weight here. In Islam, kids aren't considered property, and they definitely aren't just extensions of a parent's ego. They're an amana, a divine trust from God. A huge piece of this is the concept of fitra, which the sources describe as a child's innate, pure disposition. This completely flips the script on parenting. It means your primary job isn't to forcefully impose an identity onto your kid, but to protect and nurture their internal purity through a holistic process called tarbiyah. The Quran captures this dual nature perfectly, stating that wealth and children are but adornment of the worldly life. It's a beautiful way of saying kids are a literal gift, a joyous adornment. But because they are that divine trust, raising them fairly is actually a profound spiritual test, and fundamentally an act of worship. Moving on to Section 2, material equality and justice in giving. So, how does this theological idea translate to the real world? Well, there's this amazing historical account of An-Nu'man bin Bashir. His father decided to give a special gift just to him, completely favoring him over his brothers. The mother actually insisted that Prophet Muhammad witness the transaction. But when the father went to the Prophet to explain the gift, the Prophet just stopped him and asked, "Have you given the like of it to every one of your sons?" When the father said no, the Prophet flat out refused to witness it. Instead, he gave this incredibly stark command: be afraid of Allah and be just to your children. That swift correction forced the father to go right back home and take the gift back. It's such a practical example showing that, in this tradition, justice isn't just something for the courtroom. It is strictly commanded right there in the living room. Which brings us to Section 3, fairness in affection, going way beyond material wealth. Because fairness isn't just about cash or toys, right? Islamic scholars have outlined a framework that requires absolute equality across several domains: material gifts, future inheritance, physical affection, and your daily time and attention. You literally cannot emotionally shortchange one child while showering another with attention. It's just not allowed. And to really appreciate how radical this was, you have to look at the historical context. Pre-Islamic Arabia heavily favored sons, often to the horrific point of female infanticide. The Islamic mandate came in and absolutely crushed that practice, demanding completely equitable treatment and affection, regardless of whether you had a son or a daughter. There's a really striking anecdote from the classical scholar Ibn al-Qayyim that shows how deep this emotional equality is supposed to run. He describes a man sitting with the Prophet when his kids walked up. The man warmly kissed his son and pulled him onto his lap. But when his daughter came up, he just had her sit down beside him. The Prophet spotted this unconscious bias instantly. He looked at the man and asked this piercing question: why can't you be just between them? He called out that inequality in affection right on the spot. It's one of those moments that forces that father, and honestly all of us today, to really examine how we distribute our physical affection. Let's look at Section 4, preventing jealousy and the psychological aftermath. Look, if you've ever been around sibling rivalry, you know it's a powder keg. Discrimination in the home inevitably breeds deep-seated jealousy, ill will, and a highly toxic family environment. The source texts are very clear that a discriminated child will carry lifelong grudges against their parents and their siblings, which is exactly how family ties get severed in adulthood. So, playing favorites? It isn't just a tiny parenting mistake. Islamic teachings categorize it as a literal, grave injustice. It's an action that actively destroys the harmony, the trust, and the mutual respect of the entire family unit. Finally, our conclusion: the legacy you leave behind. We may look at all these classical principles, it all points to the kind of environment we're building every single day. Because ultimately, the legacy you leave your kids isn't just the stuff you hand down, it's how fairly you gave it. Maintaining absolute justice is the absolute bedrock of a loving, resent-free family.
So think about your own upbringing for a second, or how you parent your own kids. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final thought. Will your children remember you for what you gave them, or will they remember you for how fairly you loved them? Thanks for exploring this topic with me.